Everybody, oh my God, I got a guy on the channel. He's so smooth. This is his second time being on Strong Inspirations. And what happened was I follow this guy from afar. I'm in Detroit, he's in Florida. I've been following his career, and this guy is on the upkeep. He is really, really effectively giving out Black history in his town and in the college that he teaches at schools and what have you. And the people really respect this young man. Oh, he's a heavy hitter on my show, Strong Inspiration. And let me tell you, my name is Anthony Brogdon. He's going to say his name, and we got that in common. And I'm excited to be on here with him once again. Because when he was on here last time, oh man, he had me shaking my head saying, oh, you really put it down on a unique topic. Matter of fact, what he talks about is kind of representative of a celebration that's going on today or the last couple of days with the Native Americans. Y'all will hear this story, all right? So things are really happening since he has last been on here at Strong Inspirations. We've reached over 500 videos, over 2,100 subscribers. So please hit the subscribe button. A ton of likes. Good people like him have come on the channel, and maybe I'm getting better at asking questions. I don't know. I'm gonna keep doing it because I gotta give it to you straight, no chasing. I'm not playing with you, my friends. I want y'all to know this, and I got a vehicle here that you're watching me, and luckily I find people like this gentleman here. So this thing is serious. As you all know, and I can tell y'all doing this every now and then, watch my movie, Business in the Black. It's streaming on Amazon. I talk about slaves who own businesses. I interviewed about, I don't know, 15 people whose family owned the business in the early 1900s in this film. And it's on Amazon. So watch this. It's called Business in the Black. I took it one step further and I wrote this book, and the book sales are up. And when book sales are up, that means I'm donating more books to schools because they're really reflective of the other. Every 10th book I sell, I donate one to a school. And you buy 10 books, I give it to the school you want me to give it to, and I'll send you one for free. How about that, my friends? Because it has become my mission that people hear about rich Black people in the 1800s. There are 31 of them in this book. We hear how slaves, enslaved, got education and then go to college. I tell you how they did it. We hear, and I got to be complete and thorough, what the racists did. There are about 5 chapters on that, running them highways right through our city, Black business districts. They did it all over America. It is intentional. They did it here in Detroit. Just wipe that Black bottom out. We talk about that in the book and so much more. So get you a copy of this. It's on Amazon, and it's also on my website, businessintheblack.net. A couple more housekeeping things. I'm making a movie from this book. It's titled They Did It. I'm going to get you this information one way or another. So you can see it in my documentary. You can see it in my book. You're going to see it in this They Did It, which will be streaming on Tubi, if you're familiar with that, and Amazon. You can have a showing in your home and in your church. We'll work that out. It's my mission to get this information out there. So They Did It. We've been filming. You can help me in that cause. Again, all that information is on my website. And I got a children's book coming out titled They Did It, which is different than the Black business book, because all it talks is about the rich people. I don't do nothing with the other part of history to accommodate, if you can say it, I'm gonna be honest, to accommodate those other folk who want to use that as the measuring stick. Well, come on, measure it by that then. I don't care, because you're gonna hear what we did. That's the mission. The other will also come around. You can't hide that information. And so all that is happening. Again, go to my website, businessintheblack.net. Now, you hear me use this term strong a lot. Strong is my favorite word. It identifies this gentleman that's on the show today, tonight, whenever you see it. Strong stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. And that is my introduction for the strong soul, brother. Come on, man, and tell us your name. Let's get it on once again.
All right. My name is Dr. Anthony Dixon. I'm a public historian. History has always been my background. From grade school, it was my favorite subject. I have a bachelor's, master's, PhD in history. I also have a master's in library information science, where I specialize in special collections and archives dealing with African-American material culture.
Oh man, I told you everybody he heavy. So let me, and he knows how the protocol goes. I asked him a couple of questions, not as in depth as before, but where did you grow up at? Where?
I grew up in Fort Valley, Georgia.
Fort Valley, Georgia. Okay, and how did you? What turned you on to history so tough?
I don't know. Growing up, history was my favorite subject. And then when I got to college, as young people do, we look for those majors that we feel gonna make us the most money. And so I was a business major, business econ major, electronic engineering tech major, all the ones I thought was going to be the most lucrative. And it really just wasn't me. And I wasn't doing well in it because it wasn't me. And so I had a serious conversation with my mother, and she was like, history is your favorite subject. If it's what you love to do, then it is what you need to do. And so I took that intro to Afro-Am history class, and I never looked back.
All right, well, let me ask you this. What does the study of history mean? I mean, because how do you keep studying it over and over again? How do you get a PhD in history? They tell you something a little more in depth? What does that mean?
Yeah, it's in depth. It's looking at, you narrow the focus down more and more, and you begin to look at not only the events, right? But you look at the theories on why these events happen and what are the repercussions of those events. And then you use that information as a blueprint in going toward the future, because a lot of the information that I've learned, and this is why I became a public historian, is very useful for self-empowerment and community empowerment. Some of the things that we did, some of the information that we had readily available within the community was why the community was doing so well. And so if we can look at some of those things and make those changes for today's time, then we can get back to doing well once again. And when I say doing well, I mean within the community, where the community has a lot more unity, a lot more self-empowerment. Now, we know that there are the outside forces that have dictated a lot on our community, because the larger number of people have had a lot of things that directly affect us in the community. But when you actually look at our history, right, the one thing that we must look at internally, right, is our lack of unity. And our lack of unity is really what gave them the opening to be able to come into our community and do these different things to us.
Oh, okay.
And so,
I like where you're going with this.
So when we get back to understanding, right, that this is the greatest time when we have the greatest need for unity, because our self-empowerment can be at its greatest potential if we just unify.
Okay, let me
And I'll
stop you
give
there.
you,
I got a few of them. I got a few that popped up at me. Okay, and let's go back to the history standpoint. What
okay,
did were black people together back during slavery? What was that
to a
dynamic?
certain degree, yes, to a certain degree, yes, they were. Um, I get the questions because I do concentrate on slave rebelliousness and enslaved rebelliousness and resistance to slavery and oppression. And I always get the number one answer if the number one question rather, as to why we didn't have these mass rebellions, right? And
Okay.
why these mass rebellions didn't translate to the complete overthrow of the slave system.
Okay.
And so there were factors that caused that. And so the number one factor was the intelligence factor. And I don't mean intelligence in terms of sense or knowledge. I mean the intelligence in terms of information and the ability to transfer information.
Okay.
And I give you the prime example.
Okay.
The Denmark Vesey rebellion was probably the best example of the disadvantage we had with intelligence, right? The way that the enslaved were carrying the rebellion was that they were trying to time it, right? Not only were they trying
Okay,
to
hold on, hold
time
on,
it.
hold on, hold on. I don't mean no disrespect. For those who don't know, explain what that scenario was, and then bring us to what you're talking about. Because some people
Okay,
might
well,
not know what that rebellion was about. Go ahead.
Denmark Vesey in South Carolina organized a rebellion. There were actually three types of rebellion, right? Three types of revolts, right? One was the instantaneous, when something happens and it causes the enslaved or even that one enslaved person to rebel.
Okay.
And then there's the rebellion against a certain group, like the Nat Turner Rebellion was not against slavery altogether, but it was against the slave owners in Southern Virginia and specifically Southampton County,
Okay.
because he had gotten hold. First, he learned how to read. Then he had gotten hold to Virginia law, and he realized that the slave owners in Southern Virginia and specifically Southampton County were actually violating the laws that were set for enslavement.
Okay.
You see, and then there's the Vesey, where they were trying to overthrow the entire slave system. And so this revolt, it failed primarily because of this intelligence factor. Basically, the way it was supposed to go off was that they were setting fires as a symbol to the revolt actually starting, right?
Okay.
But because the revolt required them to walk, right? When they set the fires, different enslaved people in different areas at different plantations began to walk. But white people, the enslaved patrollers and the overseers, were on horses, you see.
Okay.
So they were 10 times faster and had the ability to get to Charleston and the outside plantations to alert them as to what was going on. You
I
see,
got you.
that's the intelligence factor, not the intelligence that we normally think of, but it's more like the intelligence of like CIA intelligence,
I
see the
got you. I
information.
got you. I got you.
And so by the time large numbers of enslaved people are on the roads in rebellion, the people, the whites in Charleston, were ready.
Oh, I got you. I
And
got
so
you.
they were able then to garner themselves, get together, get on horses, and meet the rebellion before it gets to Charleston.
I got
You
you.
see?
I got
And
you.
so that's the primary factor as to why. The second one, of course, is the artillery, right? The ability of whites to have guns where the enslaved were relying on other things like clubs,
Yeah,
fire,
sure, sure,
things of that nature,
sure,
hoes, axes,
sure,
tools, things of that nature.
sure.
But the intelligence factor is really their ability to share that information and get together is really the main problem when it came down to rebellions.
I got you.
However, right, when we look at the largest, which is what I did my study on, the largest slave rebellion, which is the Second Seminole War, this is why you don't hear much about it, because they wrap it into a Native American or a quote unquote Indian war. But in actuality, even the general himself wrote back to DC, to the Secretary of War, and said, this is not an Indian war. This is a Negro war.
Okay.
And
Let
so,
me go back. Let me go back. Let me go back. And you on a good point there, and I know that's the bulk of what we want to talk about. But let me go back to this. Did all the black people agree to be a part of the diversity rebellion, or some of them said, "Hey, I'm okay with the way things are"? What was that dynamic?
right. Now we have to consider that as well. The what we commonly refer to as Uncle Tom um, syndrome, or whatever the case you may want to call it. But there were those who, whether it was out of fear or out of um, pure manipulation, that they were trained and thought to feel closer to their masters than to their own people, right?
Right.
And a lot of this, we understand now, a lot of this did tie back to this whole idea of whiteness and Christianity. And that whites were at that time really considered the closest to Christianity and
Okay.
to what they figured was God, right?
Okay.
Because
Okay.
when whites began to develop back in Europe, when they began to develop their ideas of Christianity,
Okay.
they told themselves, of course, that Yeshua or Jesus was white.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And so even from the studies of Dr. Ben, we realized that that was a whole fictionalized story, right? That Jesus was actually born in a cave in Ethiopia.
That's right.
But
That's
at
right.
the Council of Nice, they moved him out of Ethiopia and moved him into Bethlehem,
That's
which
right.
was an area that whites would feel more comfortable with.
That's
And
right.
so they began to accept the idea that God was white.
That's right.
And so when they came across dark-skinned people, they told themselves that's the devil's people. And so from
I
that
guess.
point on, they began to transfer that idea on to the enslaved. That
And it, go
whatever
go
religion,
ahead.
whatever spirituality you have is worshiping something negative.
Yeah.
And that we are the truth and the light because God is white. And so when that complex sets in within the slave, because you control every other aspect of that person's life. And any sociologist and psychologist will tell you, if you can control the basic necessities of a person's life, then you can control that person.
The other
So
thing that they were able to do was they and I'm talking about they being the white people, they did a split among black people, the light against dark in that era, and also maybe those who were able to work in the house and had favor were able to take that and say, okay, my life is okay. I don't have no real problem the way things are.
exactly. When you see, that's why I said it goes back, right? When we look at our lack of unity, right, it opened the door for all of those things. So once you start, and that's a tactic that they use, that divide and conquer, and using that as a tactic to get to the divide and conquer is something that they have always used.
Yeah, yeah.
Even when we look at the Spanish, before the English even get to North America, when you look at the Spanish in La Florida, what they did was they divided Native Americans between the Tidewater region, of course, those that were along the coast of Florida, and then the freshwater region. And so they began to pick and choose who they were going to deal with, who they were going to give some of their things like forks, plates, knives, things of that nature.
Right.
And so they used that and brought Christianity into those Native American villages. And then for those Native Americans that didn't accept it, you see, they would give the other ones more so that they would look down and shun the ones who didn't have it. You see, it's that whole divide and
Yeah,
conquer.
yeah. It's that.
So using that same ideology within the enslaved society,
Right.
is simple enough as well, right? You treat one better than you treat the other. You show more favoritism to one group than you show the other. Your what we call your skill slaves, enslaved rather, the blacksmiths, the laundresses, the cooks, those that they considered had skills. You actually could even elevate them a little bit by paying them a little money.
Yeah, right. That's
And
right.
giving them the opportunity after about 15 to almost 20 years, if they saved up, to buy their freedom.
That's right.
You see, so when you use all of those different things, yeah, it causes a division within the people. So yes, you had that division between the house and the field. And even when you look at the French take it to a different level. They even create a society called a three-tier society, where you have blacks, you have Creoles, and then you have whites. So those that they intermingle with and have miscegenation with, they create a whole different class and call them Creoles. They treat them better. Some of them even, of course, are free and given freedom. And while others, even though they may be enslaved, a lot of times they are treated different.
Yeah, I got you.
Now, that's not to say that there weren't any Creoles that were still in the fields.
Right.
They were. But as that number was much lower than the other Creoles who were being treated much differently. And that's what I'm saying. When you create a whole society, then you definitely now, right, you've let classism go into that group now. You spreaded that other disease. Because I tell people all the time, and I used to tell my students when I was teaching, yeah, I have to update you. I'm in the field full time now. I'm not teaching anymore, but for right now.
Yeah.
But I used to tell my students all the time, and I tell people now all the time. When you look at the colonies, you look at the United States, you look at the history, right? People tend to think that racism is the root of this whole country and the problems and the negative and everything else that goes with it,
Oh,
right?
sure,
It was
sure.
But I remind people, I was like, no, there were two seeds. There were two seeds planted in the roots of this country. It was racism and classism, because whites treated poor whites poorly also. You know, they separated themselves also. And so to keep poor whites in line, and to keep poor whites from actually getting together with blacks, they made sure that classism was firmly in place. So then they let poor whites feel as if you may be poor, but at least you are white. And so even poor whites began to look down on blacks, right? At least I'm not. And you can see that all the way through the 1900s, right?
Yeah, that's right.
White people, even today, poor whites claim, well, at least I ain't black.
Right, that's
even
right.
Though they could be in worse condition. Black person has the house and everything else. A poor white would still tell themselves, at least I ain't black.
Let me ask you this question. So now, back in the slavery days, were black people conditioned enough to say, I wouldn't associate with other blacks who were not of my yoke, let's say? Did they separate themselves out in gatherings, in marriages, or you name the example?
By far. Some of it was by choice, some of it was by force, right? But yes, they would. You know, when we get towards the end of the slavery period, you start seeing how those that we, like I said, the domesticants and the ones they call the skilled, are looking to intermarry with other skilled and other domestics, and those that were in the fields are marrying in the field, those other former field enslaved.
Right, I got you.
And you see this even when the Homestead Act comes, and that's when, of course, after the Civil War, they basically gave the planters back their land, and then they decided, yeah, we will give some blacks some of this land too. So a small number of blacks compared to the population were given free land. Those blacks, some of those blacks, not all of them, but some of those blacks even went into the sharecropping system, you see? And so that division continued on. That was the division by choice, right? Now, there's another division, and I'm familiar with this one because this is the division that affects me personally because it was in my family. My great, one more, grandfather and grandmother were both quote unquote mulattoes, right?
Okay.
They were mixed. They had white fathers, right?
Okay.
Neither one of them were accepted by either side. They weren't accepted fully by blacks, and they certainly weren't accepted by whites.
Okay.
And so mulattoes began to come together and intermarry with themselves as well. See, and that was really by force because neither side accepted them.
I got you. I understand
we see it on a much larger scale. Again, I go back to the French in the Mississippi River Valley, which is basically geographically from New Orleans to Memphis.
Okay.
Excuse me. We see it when they create that Creole society. And so the only way you could get into that Creole society was that you were a free black. If you were a free black with all African heritage, the only way you could intermarry with a Creole woman is to be free and have something. You are either an apprentice to a white man, or you are apprentice to a blacksmith, or something to that degree. but that was the only way that you were going to be able to permeate into that Creole society.
I
So
got
you
you.
see, that's the part, of course, that was also by choice, that Creoles, because they were getting treated better and they were able to go into these plaçages, and I won't go too far into plaçages,
Yeah.
but a plaçage was basically an agreement that a Creole woman would have with a French man. And she would be able to negotiate her life and her children and future children's lives that she may have with this man.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And so, yes, she was given that type of freedom as a Creole to be able to go into an agreement with
Let
this
me
French man.
let me ask you this: have you? And we're gonna get to the other topic at hand. Do you see an instance where a person had it, and maybe Vesey was that kind of guy? Because Vesey was rich, from what I gather, he was educated. Where
Yeah, he
he,
was.
yeah, where he fought for those that did not have. Was that what was their motivating factor? I love my people.
Yes, it was that. It was the I love my people and that Christian sense, right?
Okay.
That he felt a brotherly connection to other African descendants, right? Just like now, when we look at Pan Africanists, right? They feel and they look for specific things that tie them to the larger African diaspora, right?
Okay.
They
Okay.
look at the experience of Afro-Caribbean people, some of the things that they went through that are shared in the history of what African Americans went through
Okay.
in Panama,
Okay.
in London, you
Okay.
see, in different places in the world, right? And so
Okay.
it's that feeling of connectiveness that they have because they do know at some point they have had some shared experiences.
I got you.
And so that's why the diaspora, I believe the diaspora is going to get stronger because we get these clips, these video clips, these YouTubes, these Facebook clips of Black people around the world being treated unfairly simply because they are Black.
That's right.
And
Let me
so
pick.
African Americans and
Right.
other Afro Caribbeans
Yeah.
and other Blacks around the world quickly identify.
Let me pivot to the other part of the topic. Now you said Creoles, you said mulattoes, you said blacks, you said whites, and then there's the Native Americans
Yeah.
and that interaction. Where does that fit in this dynamic?
The basic problem between Native Americans and whites started with the idea of land use and property rights, right?
Okay. Okay.
The way Native Americans lived was that they would live in one area for a period of time. They would hunt in that area, they would grow crops in that area, and they would stay in that area until the wildlife was low and the soil started going bad,
Okay.
right? Then they would simply pick up and move to another area in their quote unquote land. And they would go and live there and
Okay.
another spot, such that
Okay.
they'll between come back though, the land is replenished as well as the wildlife. So what happens is when Europeans come, particularly the English, when they would come into that area and they would see that a Native American village had been left, they would move in. Such that by the time the Native Americans come back, they like, what are you doing here? And so the English would say, wait a minute, you left this land. And they were like, no, we didn't leave it. We went and migrated because that's what we do. And so the English said, well, if you leave the land, then we're going to move in. Okay.
All right.
The problem occurred was that when the English would create a settlement, right? And they would wander around and they would find a better spot, right? Which most likely meant they were closer to a water source, right?
Okay.
So they would move closer to that water source. When a Native American would move into that settlement that the English left, the English would come back and say, no, we own that. And then Native Americans would say, wait a minute, you said if
Right,
we
right.
left the area.
I got you.
But the English said, no, it all belongs to us. You see, and that's where the basic problem came in. And so when plantation society begins to really take off, right, it encroaches on Native American land. And so when you look at the case of the first Underground Railroad, you realize that these these blacks that are leaving the Carolinas and they're coming down into La Florida, which was at that time owned by the Spanish, you start seeing Native Americans who are also coming down into La Florida because plantation society keeps encroaching on their land. Okay. And so they began to develop these villages in close proximity. And it was for survival. Now, here's the thing that we want to move forward with our relationship. When I say our, I mean Black relationship, and to come back to some type of congruency, because Blacks and Native Americans have been split totally apart now. And if you want, I'll get into what happens there. And I'll continue to use this same group, the Seminoles, as a primary example. The Seminole and Creeks are primary examples. But what we need is for everyone to understand historically how that relationship began, right?
Okay.
And so when plantation started encroaching on Native American land, the first thing they saw was blacks encroaching on their land. And then they quickly began to understand that it was blacks being enslaved and forced to encroach on their land, right?
The Native Americans is feeling this way.
Right. Some Native Americans, that's the first thing they see. They see these blacks on their land, chopping down the trees, clearing the land. But it doesn't take long for them to understand that they're being forced to do so by the same whites who keep taking their land in other places.
I got you.
All right. So once that understanding is already made, and then they began to come down into La Florida, and they're living in these close proximities, right? Native Americans are forced to change the way they live, right? And so now Native Americans are forced to live in a much smaller area. It is blacks who teach them how to grow crops in that area, how you rotate crops, how you rotate fields with certain crops, how to survive in just that one area with agriculture.
Okay.
And so when Native Americans get back to that understanding, they look at their history and they get back to that understanding that it is actually blacks who taught them how to change and survive, then we can start reconciling with that relationship.
Now, there's no class. Hold on. There's no the Native Americans are better than blacks type attitude at that point. Are they kind of thought of among
not at that
themselves
point?
Okay.
No, not at that point. It comes
Okay.
later on. That's why I said I'm going to use the
I got you.
Seminoles
I got you.
as a primary example. I'm gonna
I
use the
got you.
Seminoles and Creeks.
All right.
The problem with the example we have with the Creeks, and the problem is the Creeks simply began to accept plantation society. So they began to actually buy and trade enslaved Africans and African Americans. Now,
Okay.
what happens, what we're finding out, and hopefully we'll get to it when we talk about my current project, is that when they are immigrated, and you know what they call the early days of the Trail of Tears, and they go out to the Arkansas Territory, which is present day, and present, all of it was considered Arkansas Territory back then, but then as the lines got drawn and things were, it became Oklahoma, right?
Okay.
And so what happens is, in time, the U.S. government started giving the Seminoles more land, right? They were giving the Seminoles and the Black Seminoles land.
Okay.
Now, they weren't giving that many Black Seminoles because they didn't want to give Black Seminoles too much, but they were. Now, here's the kicker of what happens. Whites started wanting that free land as well, right? And so what we find is that whites started paying other whites to list them as Native American so that they could get those that land and get free crop. And
Oh
so
man.
what we find is it then goes into a three-way split. You got Seminole Native Americans, you got Seminole Blacks, and now you got these Seminoles that are called Seminoles, but they are purely white.
Mm.
And when they get in the Seminole Nation, they bring all of the negative connotations about Blacks and all of the discrepancies, all the racism, and everything else. And they get Native Americans to turn against Blacks. And so you have this split between Native Americans and Blacks within the Seminole Nation, primarily because these whites have infiltrated the Seminole Nation.
Okay.
Now,
Let me go back to one of the things that you talked about earlier, just for the sake of time.
okay,
Because you're on point, man. You come back on here anytime. I mean, we're gonna
all
keep
right,
this rolling. So don't worry about that. You mentioned the rebellion of the Seminole Indians.
yes,
I want to just touch on that for a minute. They rebelled against who and how big was it? You when you talked
all
about
right.
that? Yeah.
The second Seminole War, there were three Seminole Wars. The second Seminole War was the largest, deadliest, and costliest Native American war ever fought by the U.S. government and military. But what we find out is that the U.S. government and the military found out that it was really the Blacks who were fighting the most, because the U.S. government had decided that those Blacks that had escaped in the 1600s, like I said earlier,
Right.
and came down into La Florida, and now they are 4 or 5 generations strong, that all of them should be returned to slavery. And so they fought against that re-enslavement, and they won, and they got their freedom, and they were immigrated out west. And so it is the largest slave rebellion. It is the most successful slave rebellion. And so, as far as the Native Americans are concerned, of course, they fought to stay in Florida, but they were not able to do so. The majority of them, the majority of the Seminoles now live out west. We still do have some Seminoles in Florida, Of course, if you go to Miami, you see the big hard rock, Seminole hard rock, with the big guitar that you see on TV nationally.
Right.
So they are still in Florida as well, but these are low numbers. The majority of them went out west. Now, the thing about that is, right, when you look at, even when you look at Osceola, right, and everybody knows Florida State with Renegade and the Florida State Seminoles, and Osceola is their primary mascot and whatever. The reason that Osceola does not get all of the publicity and written in the annals of history the way Sitting Bull and Geronimo and Chief Joseph and the others get is because A, his mother was of mixed heritage. She was Native American and Black. B, he had a Black wife. And C, most of his warriors within his band were Black. And he identified with his fighting closest to the Blacks. So if you go into Osceola, and if they were to do more information on Osceola, then you would find out just how important the Blacks were to the war, and you would find out that it really was about a slave rebellion. And that is not what they want you to know, especially now that we have DeSantis in office, who is completely trying to minimize. Well, he's going further now. It's not even about minimizing now. He is spreading misinformation and outright lies in the public school system now. It has gotten to that point now.
Now, when you do this research and you conclude as you do, if we were able to think of it in today's terms, it still would make sense. It's not mind blowing what the white people did or the dynamics between people. It's just it happened then, and under those conditions. There's nothing unusual about it. I mean, if I'm gonna make a ploy on you, this is the ploy I'm gonna make. There's a question there somehow.
Well, okay, say that last part again.
The last part is when you come up with this and you say this is what happened, you can say, aha, that makes sense.
Right. See, and that's the thing about it, right? So then you ask, well, if it's history, like they always say, oh, that happened a long time ago, all this, all that, right?
That's right.
Now, if they really were to believe that history happened a long time ago and that it doesn't have any bearing on today, then why are you so interested in not telling the full story and not telling the truth? And it is because when people do know the whole story and they do recognize the truth, then they recognize that things that are happening today are a direct result of what has been done, and some of those things are still being done. You see, when you realize that a lot of things that happened in the past, they have only simply altered the way it's being done, but the basic premise on why is still there. They've only changed the tactics. And so when you look at history and you bring it forward, then you realize, oh, that's really the same thing they've been doing. They just changed the tactics so they have not changed. They still don't want minorities to come together. They still fear minorities coming together. They are doing everything they can now to ensure that Blacks and Hispanics or Latinos do not come together.
There you go. Now
the problem is, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
No, the problem is it is so plain and obvious that some of the same tactics are there on both communities. You know, the same way you criminalized blacks throughout the 1900s, starting in the early 1900s, all the way through the 1900s, and even today, you are starting to do that now with Latinos. Trump, when he was in office, blamed all that border stuff on what? Latino and Hispanic criminals, that they were bringing criminals in. So you started the exact same tactic of criminalizing Latino and Hispanic.
I got you. There you go.
The same way you did, because in actuality, all you see them as is our replacement.
Yes,
That's all you see them as.
There you go.
Our replacement.
Now you have, like I say, you come back on your time. You've written several books. Let's talk a little bit about that. I think you have them behind you. How do people follow you and stuff like that?
Okay. How many minutes I got?
Go ahead. You rock with this one because I want to promote you. Yeah.
Give me a second, brother, because I do want to ride for a second.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
I got two main things that I'm working on in terms with the books. My first one is this book. I know it's hard to see.
We can see it.
I don't know if I can.
Yeah.
But it's called. It's basically called A Timeline of the African Diaspora Experience in Florida. Now, this book I originally published for school teachers to use as a reference, and it's nothing but a basic timeline. Got lots of nice pictures and whatnot in it.
Right.
A timeline of Black history in Florida.
Right. Okay.
We do a brief discussion about Africans coming into this hemisphere before Europeans, but the timeline really starts in 1513 with Ponce de Leon, and it goes all the way to about 2007.
Oh, okay.
And so I reprinted this book and brought it back out because now, of course, DeSantis will not let it come into the public schools, but also because we have to get this book in every Black family home in Florida.
I got you.
Because
I love it.
What he has done is, like I said, he has gotten to the point now where he is giving our children misinformation and flat out lies.
I got you.
And so to combat that, we have to do it internally.
I got you.
And give them the information. This is a straightforward book, easy to read.
Yes.
A school child can sit home with their grandparents and go through this book together.
I got you. I love it.
You know, and so that's the first project. Now, the main project, I want everybody, if you got a pen or pencil, please write this down. It's called the Black Seminole Project.
Right.
And that is based on this book, Florida's Negro War, the Second Seminole, Black Seminoles and the Second Seminole War, 1835 to 1842. Now, I was contacted about a year ago by a filmmaker in Los Angeles. And basically, long story short, we are now doing a documentary on the Black Seminoles, and we're going to take a regional approach looking at the communities in the 5 major regions that they are, Florida, Oklahoma, Mexico, Texas, and the Bahamas.
Okay.
And we're going to do a documentary. Not only will we give the history, but we are talking about Black Seminoles and their issues that they are facing today.
Okay.
And each point person for each region is also a producer. So they have direct say in what is going to be put out on their behalf with this documentary.
I love it.
Now, the movie is based purely on the book, which is about the Second Seminole War. And this is about runaways, these enslaved Blacks in Florida who run away, It is about the Maroon societies, those people with Gullah ancestors out of the Carolinas who come into Florida and eke out their own existence in the wilderness of Florida. And then those blacks who intermingled with Native Americans and have Native American heritage and ancestry, as well as Black ancestry, and how all three of those groups came together, fought the U.S. government, and won their freedom.
I love it.
They first established the first Underground Railroad. There were actually 3 Underground Railroads. They only talk about the one that involved whites. They don't talk about the first one, which was actually longer. They don't talk about the third one because it still has implications today. The third Underground Railroad basically went from Louisiana, Texas, into Mexico, Central, and some parts of South America. And the country of Belize was one of the main places that they went. And for that reason, Belize never had an extradition treaty with the United States. And to this day, they still don't.
I got you.
I want you to go to blackseminoleproject.com.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to ask you. Yep.
Buy the book. I want you to get the book, subscribe to the page, right? And then follow us as we make the documentary and then the movie. We actually have Louis Gossett Jr. as a producer. He has gotten on board. He is all in with us, and he has been helping us along the way.
Okay, so, excellent.
What we're trying to do is do this within the Black community as well, because we understand with this story, historical accuracy is a must. And so with that historical accuracy, there is no white savior. There is no strong white ally that they can make supporting actor. We are looking for the support to do this movie because it is a story of self-reliance, self-empowerment, and most of all, unity.
I love it.
What happens when Black people actually come together and what they can accomplish. And so under that same spirit, we are going to get this movie done. The Black community is going to support us. We've been gaining momentum for months now. We plan to keep building on that momentum because they understand that this is a story that needs to be told, because we need to understand first our history, but we also need to see. We need to see when Black people come together, how successful we really can be.
Well, now, give us the website again.
The website is blackseminoleproject.com. Now, you can also go to my website, particularly for your followers who do live in Florida. Go to ProfAE Dixon.com. That is where you can get both books.
Yes.
But Florida's Negro War is on the blackseminoleproject.com website.
Yes. Okay. Hey, everybody, I told you, you're going to like this. We're going to have this brother back because he ain't finished telling us the story. I had to jump around and get bits and pieces. But at the end of the day, and you close us out very well on this, is the unity that, and the power in that. And there's examples of that working throughout our history for a common cause in many respects. Thank you so very much for coming back on Strong Inspirations. You a cool dude, man. You on point. You on to something with this, man. And I'm supportive any way I possibly can. Everybody go to his website. All that will be in the description. The movie will be coming out. It's probably maybe 1 or 2 years away or something if all goes well.
Yes.
Something like that. Everybody, check him out, brother, professor, public historian Anthony Dixon. Same first name as mine, so you know he's cool. Out of Florida, fighting those who don't want the story to be told at all and specifically correctly. So everybody hit the subscribe button on this, because I know on the channel, hit the subscribe button, but hit the like button on this, because he told you a mouthful. You heard it, you understood, and you got out of that, as I did, my viewers, how how they did what they could to break the unity factor down among us. It's always been a ploy, and he gave you some examples of that ploy in various ways. So that's a beautiful thing. This is what we do on the show. And hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the notifications bell. Tell somebody about strong inspirations. Don't keep it to yourself. And to you, my brother, I say this, and I mean this with all sincerity. I want you to continue to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind. I love what you're doing. Somehow you came out of your area and you said Black history is what I'm gonna do, and you have done it for a few years now, I'm sure, many years, decades even, and you've done it and have found your niche, and you are an expert in telling this story eloquently as you deliver it. Thank you so very much for coming on the show. Everybody, strong inspirations. We'll be back at you again soon, and with Brother Dixon. I ain't finished with him yet, my friend. don't count him out. No,
don't do that at all.
Don't do that at all. Hey,
one more time.
Go ahead.
BlackSeminoleProject.com,
Yep.
ProfAEDixon.com.
There you go. Everybody, one more time. All right, we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, brother.
Yes, sir.
All right.